Hi Cyber Law class, it's Professor Opterbeck, and I wanted to send you this brief video to welcome you officially to week 1 of our class and to give you a little bit more information about myself and about how the class will work. So a little bit about me. I graduated from Seton Hall Law School in 1991. I started practice at McCarter & English here in Newark, and I was there for 13 years. I became a partner there. I was a partner for a few years before I then got into teaching here. I have an LLM from NYU in trade regulation, which is intellectual property and antitrust. And you might have also seen I do some work in theology and religion. I have some degrees in that field as well, and I'm interested in seeing how all of those themes kind of overlap. So when I was in practice, I started in the product liability group at McCarter & English, which was a big practice area for them. But I pretty quickly got put into the intellectual property group, really just because they needed some help on what turned out to be an interesting trademark and antitrust case. And that was in the early 1990s. And then by about 1993-94, the internet was just beginning to become publicly available. And if you can imagine this, there's no public internet when I started practicing law. There was no email generally available when I started practicing law. We had desktop computers, but in the beginning they were just dumb terminals connected to a mainframe. I was actually part of the first generation at my firm of lawyers beginning to use Microsoft Windows. So a lot of things were very different when I started practicing law, and the internet really has revolutionized things over the past 30 years in ways that are in some ways even hard to imagine. And when I first started getting interested in the internet, I'd always been interested in computers. I'm not a computer scientist, but I was just always interested in computers. And in 1994-95, I coded, learning a little bit of HTML, my own web page on the very early parts of the public internet. And a New Jersey Law Journal reporter reported in 1995 that I was the first lawyer to have a homepage on the internet. And that was a lot of fun. It also got me in a lot of trouble because I wasn't, as a young associate at McCarter & English, supposed to speak directly to reporters. But some other people at the firm thought it was kind of forward thinking, and it did get me involved then more deeply in the early beginnings of what we then called computer law. And so over the years, I did a lot of different kinds of things in my practice over the years, but one thing that I really enjoyed was representing small software startup companies, almost like I was their general counsel. So I've been doing computer and internet law for a very long time. I often joke that, if I'd really been smart about it, I should have sort of found a way to ride the early internet bubble, which I never quite did. But I find this stuff so interesting. I find the technology really interesting. I find the law that relates to it really interesting. About 10 years ago here at the law school, I started focusing some of my research and some of my teaching on cybersecurity law. The kind of era of the big data breach was really just beginning then. And I got to do a bunch of different really fun projects, including launching this course. And so cybersecurity, privacy, other aspects of technology law are really the core pieces of what I do here at the law school. Some of you also know I teach constitutional law, and I've done a lot of overlap in my cyber and privacy scholarship with issues relating to surveillance and privacy and self-incrimination, artificial intelligence, as well as issues relating to executive power in cyberspace. And some of those things we'll talk about as we work our way through this class. So I do this class in this hybrid format partly because it's a way of allowing us to work through the material on the network, on the internet, to use the resource that we're actually talking about. And so there are a few unique things that you should note about this class, and hopefully you've had a chance to look at the syllabus and maybe to speak to some folks who've been through this class before. We do it in a hybrid format, which means that most of the weeks of the class we are meeting entirely online. Doing video lectures. You've seen some of the materials now for week 1. Sometimes they're produced videos like that I've produced. Sometimes they're more like lectures like this, sort of me talking to you through the camera, so to speak. And I give you reading materials, all of which I have curated. And there is a discussion board, and as you know from the syllabus, you need to do an initial post on the discussion board of at least 500 words, and then you need to respond to a classmate of at least 250 words. I'm not literally counting words, but I sort of roughly know what that is. If you do a little more, that's okay. If you do a little bit less, that's okay. But I think there's always plenty to talk about. And then there's a quiz each week, which is due by the end of the week. The discussion boards and the quizzes are not meant to be difficult. The discussion board is really designed to prompt your thinking. It's as if we were having a kind of policy discussion in the classroom. There usually aren't single or easy right or wrong answers. It's meant to be a discussion. The quizzes, there are definite right and wrong answers. It's not meant to be difficult. It's meant to emphasize some aspects of the material that I think are important. It might be some specific doctrinal content. It might be some particular points from some of the readings. And all of that is open book, but you only have an hour to complete it, and it's really meant to reinforce what we're studying during the week. Then 3 times throughout the semester we will have long Saturday summit meetings. Now, in the pre-COVID era, those were times when we all came together on campus and we would have lunch, and many of the speakers would be here with us in person. Obviously, we can't really do that in the COVID era, so we're going to do those online, but those are synchronous, meaning we're all meeting together at the same time. So I'm probably going to use Zoom for the summit meetings. We do some small group work in the summit meetings, which is a good way to work through examples and hypotheticals and deal with some of the class material, and it's just not really possible to do that well on Teams. So part of the summits will be some lecture from me, part of the summits will be some group work, but a big part of the summits is guest lectures, and I have a number of folks who I'm friendly with who are out in practice doing things related to the materials we're talking about. I have some of those folks come and talk to you about what they do on a day-to-day basis. Many of those folks are alums, and they'll talk to you about how they work their way into the careers that they have now in this field. Some of the people I have come in are policymakers and other people involved in internet governance, and they give you some, I think, really great perspectives, and you should come to those meetings really ready to ask some good questions of those guest speakers. I think it's one of the best parts of this class. Those summit meetings are long. There's no way around it. They go from 1:15 to 7:15 on Saturday afternoon. We do take enough breaks, and you'll be surprised at how quickly those days go by. Now, you'll have noticed that the material in this class is pretty heavily thematic. It's not the kind of content that really lends itself to sort of a neat outline, like say something like, torts or contracts. Kind of like health law, internet law, and cybersecurity law is kind of a body of related concepts. Some of those concepts are going to be familiar to you, so we'll spend some time talking about online contracts. We'll spend some time talking about computer crimes. And so although you might not know the specific criminal statutes involved, you'll have the concept of a criminal statute and case law that interprets it. We'll spend some time talking about Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act and some First Amendment issues. And again, some of that will be at least a little bit familiar to you in terms of the method of looking at a statute and looking at cases and at constitutional law. Some of the other stuff, including the stuff for this week, is less familiar to you as law students. It's what I really would call soft law. Because one of the interesting things about the internet, and one of the things that makes it a real challenge for the most proximate issue we're looking at of security and cybercrime, is that it's really not governed by a lot of hard law. It's not governed by a lot of immediately applicable statutory law. It's not governed by any one country's constitution. It is something that really grew up internationally and really grew up from the bottom up, based in large part on the ideas and norms of the technologists who put it together. And in many ways, that is part of the genius of the internet. That's part of what makes it work so brilliantly and lets us connect all around the world. But another way, it presents a real challenge for questions about when we have security issues, when we have crime issues, how do we deal with that? So it is a bit thematic, and it does begin in the beginning of the semester with kind of big concepts of internet governance, but it will begin to kind of narrow down and focus on the security issues that we're really interested in. Now, in terms of the final exam, which is really the bulk of your grade, I do the final exam here with a section of short answer questions and a section of sort of more traditional law school issue spotter essay questions. And if you look at the materials, you know, the kind of criminal law issues, the constitutional issues that lend themselves to traditional kinds of law school analysis are generally the kinds of things that end up in a fact pattern on the issue spotter essay part of the exam. And if you look at some of my past exams, you'll see that. And then things like we're talking about this week, like the WSIS statement of principles, you know, things like that kind of lend themselves to short answer questions. And again, if you look at some of the past exams, you'll see that. And if you have questions about that, you can get in touch with me, and we'll talk some more about it during this semester. So I hope this is a good sort of beginning overview of the class. I hope you, as you dive into this first week's materials, you really start to get a feel for the soft law of internet governance, and that you find all this stuff as interesting as I do. And I look forward this week to seeing you online.